Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We'll give it a few minutes for let some other people join on in, but thanks for those if you're already logged in. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds here and let some more people log in. You can see the list is growing as I'm talking. All right, I think we can get started here. As you can see, please make sure you submit your questions to the Q&A option at the bottom here, bottom right-hand corner of the On24 platform. We plan on addressing every single question you have. If we can't get to it today, then we will do it. We'll follow up with you on a future in the future here. So my name is Brady Moyer. I'm a global alliance manager at Splunk. So I've been at Splunk for about 7 years. And as you obviously know from signing up here, the topic we're going to cover is holistic visibility and effective alerting across IT and OT assets. So Tenable is one of our strategic partners here at Splunk, and just want to kind of give you a background of how we choose these strategic partners. At Splunk, we work with our corporate development teams, our product teams, our specialist teams, and our sales teams to understand, hey, what are the initiatives you're working on for the next 12 to 24 months? What partners can help elevate the solutions we are working on, and then help build those solutions out together, and then found a route to market that makes sense to do go-to-market activities with. So we have thousands of partners, so we can't do it with every single one. So Tenable is one of those strategic partners of ours, one of the few strategic partners of ours that we built a handful of integrations with together. And like I said, we're going to be covering one of those integrations today. So on that note, I'd like to introduce everyone and hand it over to Steve McGrath and Simon Lee from Tenable to take it from here and talk about our joint integration.
Sure. Yep, I could take it. Brady, you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yep, so I could take it. My name is Simon Lee. I'm a security engineer here at Tenable. I will be also presenting along with Steve McGrath. He's also a solutions architect. I should say distinguished because he had it on there. So I'll be covering the first part, just kind of talking about what we do, just talking about the current threat landscape. And then Steven will take it over to talk about how we work well with Splunk and how we can get the data in and work within Splunk with that data. So with that, I guess I could just move forward. Unless, Steve, you want to introduce yourself? I don't know if you wanted to. I just kind of introduced you for you.
I mean, you covered it, man. You're good.
All right, cool. All right, so we'll just move right along. So the first part, what I always want to share is this is kind of my talk track when I speak with customers is when you think of cybersecurity, when you think of Tenable, a lot of people know us as the scanner Nessus, and we use that to obviously scan servers for vulnerabilities, workstations. But as we're seeing the threat landscape expand and evolve, we know that it's not just assets anymore like workstations and laptops. It's identity. it's misconfigurations of those users, right? So I don't know if you are familiar with a lot of the breaches that are happening in the cloud, especially a lot of those are due to misconfiguration of those user permissions. So there's a lot of things that is ever evolving. And not only that, imagine having to also be able to assess that risk. So you're also looking at vulnerabilities, you're also looking at those identities, and then all that is something that you'll have to manage. So that's just adding on to the plate. So now the next question is, if we have all that in one place, right? We're not looking at just findings anymore, we're looking at misconfiguration, which I'm sure some of you guys know that misconfiguration doesn't have a CV tied to it like a findings. And so you'll need to first understand, well, what is important? Because then we start looking at something called what I like to call material impact. So yeah, there's critical, there's high vulnerabilities, but we also need to focus on the other side, the spectrum, where we're looking at, is it impacting my more business critical assets? And so when we're looking at that from that perspective, we're going to be looking at it in a form of, well, what do we need to prioritize, right? So not all assets are the same, as I like to say for customers. So one, we need to know where our more business critical assets are, those users that we need to protect, and also how do we tie that with all the different risks that we found, so that we can start prioritizing. And this is more effective for smaller teams, where if you have everything kind of everything that's on high alert, I mean, if everything's critical, nothing's really critical. So that's what I always like to tell customers is we need to help see through the mass of findings and risk and really understand what do we need to truly focus on. Once we know what we need to prioritize, then we have a plan of action, right? So we then know how can someone move laterally from, let's say, exploitable vulnerability over to a user who then can have permissions to reset passwords, who then move laterally within especially Active Directory or an Active Directory environment, right? So when we can see what we like to call the blast radius, we also want to know what is that choke point, what is that remediation or that patch that can prevent that lateral movement. And so a lot of times in this, for example, if we know that the misconfiguration of users, if you can fix that permission level, we can prevent them from moving over to other resources or other workstations. And so there's a lot of things that through this practice of understanding what's critical, device and user, we can then start really evaluating where do we need to dedicate our time and resources, right? So I like to touch upon the three fundamental pillars in security. That's people, process, and technology. So once we are understanding how to address and how to educate analysts, people on the team on what's important, right? We understand how to prevent those risks. That addresses the risk part. Once you have that process going, what to fix, what are those critical assets, right? We start adhering to certain frameworks, right? We are starting to become more compliant, and obviously we want to have a tool that can address all of this, right? So that's where we start looking at tools and technology that's not going to be looking at things from a siloed perspective, but how can we find a solution that's able to understand users, understands vulnerabilities on devices, and put it all together so that when you do need to understand what is your more critical assets that have those critical or exploitable vulnerabilities, we know what to tackle. We can see through the smoke, I like to say, and really prioritize those findings and vulnerabilities. Now, we can't move on without talking about what Tenable does in terms of helping customers do this, right? So in this case, we have a whole lot of other products within our portfolio. Three things I always like to touch upon in this example is web applications, your typical workstations, as well as the user identity, in this case, like within your Active Directory. So not everyone, well, not everyone, I would say a lot of customers and businesses, they don't just have that one thing, right? They have websites, they have user management, they have obviously workstations and computers and laptops. So if you have those three different attack surfaces, how am I supposed to measure all that in a way that if an executive says, hey, I want a report on all my risk, that we can present them with one report rather than three different reports? Because even if you have those different data, you still need a central location, a central place to bring all that data in, right? So I will say that Splunk is really good with that. I've heard of customers where they mention that they like to incorporate everything into a SIM. And obviously, a lot of times I heard Splunk. So bringing our data in is super helpful with that too, in terms of alerting. But in this case, in this example, what do we need to prioritize? How do we help customers prioritize what to tackle? And so we have different scoring metrics that we use: VPR, vulnerability priority rating, asset criticality rating, which is important because that is how we evaluate which assets are important, prioritizing essentially what to remediate first, to go after first. And then when we are tying those two metrics together, we have something called the asset exposure score. And that is essentially, I like to say, what are the chances, or what is the likelihood that a vulnerability that is exploitable is going to be impacting my business critical assets. So when we have VPR and ACR together and we have that AES score, then we're able to really understand, out of all those three different assets, what do I need to prioritize, rather than just trying to go after everything all at once. The analogy I like to say, it's more of like whack-a-mole, where you think you got something but you don't. So really having an understanding of your risk, really having an understanding of what is your business critical assets, and being able to combine that across all your different attack surfaces in your environment really helps customers really prioritize what's important. And so that is in within our solution. We call that Tenable One, which is our exposure management platform. So kind of what I touched upon was we take those different attack surfaces, not only the vulnerability management piece with the traditional assets, but again, identity, the cloud, web applications, and now we are actually in the operation technology space, right? So having all those different environments, how do we then assess risk in a more unified fashion that a lot of executives want to see, rather than having to get that another solution to find that risk, or to unify that data? So this is where a lot of the platforms moving, or I should say not the platform, but a lot of the industry is moving towards, right? We're trying not to be siloed anymore. We're trying to bring other solutions together, other capabilities, so that customers and businesses have that better understanding of their threat landscape as a whole. I believe we have a poll coming up. Okay, here's the poll. So the question here, are you currently using any Tenable Splunk integrations? And I assume, Brady, do you just wait? I guess we're gonna wait for this, for customers to kind of, or the attendees to fill this out. So we'll get about, I believe, 30 seconds.
Yep, we'll give it about 30 seconds, then we should see some results.
All right, so I already got some results. So actually 75% said no, they are not currently using Tenable Splunk integrations, and 25% said yes. All right.
All right.
Yeah, Steve, I'll pass over to you. This is your section.
Sounds good. So it's actually interesting that 3/4 of you have not used the integration here. So, and it actually gives me a good lead in terms of how we start to really make our data very portable, right? There's a lot of different things that we do within the ecosystem of working with our partners. Things like, start working with patch management or start doing automation. But obviously, with us talking about Splunk today, we're really trying to feed into how do we enrich the data that we already have into either our systems, or in this case, more specifically, into Splunk's environment, allowing you to coalesce all that data together. The real big problem that we start running into when we start talking about all of these silos of data, right? Going back to what Simon was mentioning earlier, we have all these different systems that have all of these different reservoirs of information, but you don't typically run into scenarios where the VM data starts flowing into something else that is being used for intermixed with OT infrastructure or whatnot from there. Like we're trying to do it within the VM context, trying to elevate that data up. But what happens about your IR teams? When you have your SOC analysts starting to address these issues, they're not necessarily going to have access to all of these different systems. So we have to flow all this information into something else, right? We have to get all that information into the relevant locations where that data can be aggregated, correlated, and then views being displayed, alerts being sent out, so that way we can start to get a good understanding of what's there, and then how do we start to address those, right? If you can automate and get all that information into one place, this gives you a good scenario of now you have your IR team. They see that IDS event coming in. Okay, well, what's on asset ABCD, right? Go ahead and look that up, get all the information, not only from the firewall logs that are presenting that, is it logged into the VPN, but also what is the vulnerability profile of it, right? What are those scores that Simon was talking about earlier? So bringing that, I think we have our questions slightly messed up here. I'm assuming you guys don't know how satisfied you are with the session yet. So we'll go ahead and just skip on past that one. So what we did at Tenable is we actually built an integration, a series of integrations into Splunk to try and not only but feed the data that we have in from all these different systems, but also how to present that. So when it comes to a couple of point solutions for like the web application scanning or the EASM product, we do have separate bespoke applications for those. But when it comes to our tried and true vulnerability management platforms like Tenable VM or for Tenable Security Center or even OT, right? We have a unified add-on that pulls all that information down into your Splunk environment. And then we have some example dashboards and a lot of different searches that are pre-baked for you within the Tenable app, which acts as the front end for all that. So to break these down a little bit, if we talk about the add-on real quick, the Tenable add-on is really interesting in how we've done this. So first off, the data types, because there is a lot of different data that's being fed into it, we have a common source type schema. So Tenable : the product is SC, or it's still called IO for the Tenable Vulnerability Management product. And then the data type that is there. So is it asset data? Is it vulnerability metadata? Or is it plugin metadata? And what we try and do is export all of the data from all of those data types into Splunk. We don't do anything with the raw metadata. We leave everything there. And then we provide some additional normalizations into that information to try and marry the data across these different products. So let's say you are using TVM and using OT. There is some similarity to how that data is shaped, at least from a cursory perspective. And that also allows for things like Splunk ES to then take that information and then be able to wrap all that information up and then feed it up into there. The one big thing that is really worth pointing out here is the Splunk TAs work a little bit differently than how you'd expect it to work for a lot of event data. Because all of our information is stateful, what we do is we will overload the event time with the time that the item was last observed within the system, with any of our relevant systems. So this comes into play of, like, let's say a scan ran at 3 a.m., but your synchronization to Splunk happens at 7 or 8 o'clock, right? We will actually rewrite all that event data to make it look like it occurred at 3 in the morning at that point. So that way, when you look at how these play into across all of your event data, maybe you're trying to track when was this device scanned, how did that scan work across the environment? You can actually see those play out within your event data as if it had actually occurred, at that point in time. So when we move on to the Tenable app, like I said earlier, the app itself contains a couple of example dashboards that allow you to really look at the information from several different contexts, and then some KV population searches as well. So this is actually brings into one of the things we typically see a lot of people miss when they install the Tenable app and the TA together, is that there is a few searches we ask most people to go ahead and run within the environment. And the intent here is to populate these key value stores. And so that way those lookups are built for you, and then you can interrelate all the data. We see a lot of people will not do that right off the bat, and then these dashboards don't work because they rely off of those lookups in order to build everything and cross-reference all the data. So generally, one of the things worth noting is when you first install this, go ahead and open up the application, take a look at the all-time searches, go ahead and run those. And then what you want to do is set the relevant searches to run on a nightly basis. So that way those searches are getting updated. Those lookups are basically rebuilding themselves off of the deltas of data that are occurring. So a lot of people will ask, why a KV? Why are we building these lookups and building all this information? If you think about this, Splunk is treating all this data effectively like events, right? This thing happened at this given point in time. But asset and vulnerability metadata is stateful. So we have, this concept of state, is this an active vulnerability? Is this a fixed vulnerability? Does this vulnerability reopen? How, with the severity of that vulnerability will change over time. So which one of those events do I care about? I've got 15 or 16 of them within that event stream that pertain to the same event over time. Well, I mean, you could recoalesce all that information yourself, but we built these lookup tables to try and confer the current state of that finding of that asset. And these lookup tables also allow for you to easily stitch this data together, right? So we have all this relevant asset metadata of things like the different timestamps that the asset was last seen, the last authenticated scan was run on this date. We have all the different IP addresses related to that asset, all the different MAC addresses, and those aren't necessarily attached to the finding, right? The finding may know that this is attached to asset A, but now we need to take these two data types and then wire them back together. And then if you also wanted to pull the most recent plugin metadata for that asset. So let's say, I saw this vulnerability that relates to this Microsoft bulletin not being applied to that asset. And I want to, and maybe the VPR score for it is spiked in the last 3 or 4 days. Well, but my scan data is, in this case, over a week or two old. Well, by using these lookup tables, you could actually just rewire all that up yourself within Splunk and get the current state of it without even having to run another scan, right? You've still got all that metadata, it's all there. So the idea behind all this is to try and stitch that information together in something that's nice and meaningful. And then also allow you to really work with this data a bit further too. Maybe you want to wire this up to the firewall logs you've got coming into. Maybe you've got an IDS that is throwing certain events. And you want to see, well, is that machine even vulnerable to this event that's being fired? You can actually have all of that happen very nicely and very easily within here. So if we look at kind of how all of this is working together, is we're trying to really get a better understanding of everything that is occurring across the attack surface, right? And thinking really beyond ourselves in this one. We've got a ton of information about these assets. We know a lot about what vulnerabilities exist on these assets, but we need to work with these other tools and pull all this information together. That's where Splunk does a fantastic job of coming in here. And then this gives you a lot of leverage to start to wire Splunk into your SOC team, wire it into your incident response. So that way they can, find out all the relevant data across all of their tooling, and then get a good starting point to jump into the event and then start to address and triage that. And then as well as thinking about what other vulnerabilities might be out there, what the changes that might be occurring to those are, right? Maybe we suddenly start seeing certain vulnerabilities that start getting notified. We start seeing those in the wild, right? Maybe it's the next like Heartbleed or whatnot from there, where you get something that's got a lot of media coverage and something there's a lot of eyes on it, and we need to understand very quickly what's there. Having all this information somewhere where it's all in one place. I know what is coming in. I know who's talking in 443 or what's got 443 exposed. What do I need to address? And then how do I start to focus on that? And then also tying in the criticality of that from there, using things like the ACR and AES scores to understand what are the critical assets that I need to focus on when this new event comes out. So that being said, I think we're ready for some Q&A. If you guys have any questions, feel free.
Let me see here. I'll step back real quick to the previous poll that we had. Oh, all right. I guess I move that. Okay. Looks like that one's no longer there. Okay. So let me go through the queue here, see what we have. I've got a few questions. So one said you had mentioned earlier that the add-on used the timestamp from the last scan instead of the event time. Why not rely on the event time instead?
Yeah, so when we start talking about event time versus the scan time, if you think about the amount of, again, that delta that could be there, right? It could be something as simple as 15 minutes to the next check-in. Typically, most people are updating the data from us into Splunk once a day. So knowing when that time had occurred is going to be relevant. Also, if you got something like an agent and a traditional scan that's sitting on the asset, you're going to have findings that are going to be occurring at different times. And so knowing how that's occurring, maybe there is an issue with a firewall, for example, and then you're passing data through that firewall to run that scan, and something starts getting wonky, right? You want to be able to either associate that or disassociate that very quickly. And that's a pretty good example of saying, the event occurred here, but I'm really caring about the data as it pertains to way back here.
Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see, the next one. Why are there multiple add-ons for some products, but you have SC, VM, and OT in the Tenable add-on?
Yeah, so this is actually a situation of as we have added new products, we have a couple of different approaches on things. It's worth noting, to that side note, when it comes to the web application scanner, the WAS data, that add-on is eventually going to be going away, actually, and we're going to be taking all of that data and taking that approach, merging it into the main app. So to the folks that are trying to get like stateful web app scanning data into Splunk, that's going to be changing fairly quickly and moving into the main app. Other things like the cloud security app or the ASM app, those APIs work considerably different than how our main products work. And then what we've been noticing is there's enough change over there that we don't want to keep iterating on the main app constantly as those changes are happening. As things stabilize out in those APIs, we'll be moving a lot of that into the main app. So things will slowly coalesce into one primary TA.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you for that. And for those out there that are interested, we're talking about all these different apps and add-ons, and you can find those on Splunk Base as well. So all the different integrations that we have, you can go to Splunk Base on the Splunk website, splunkbase.com, and you can splunkbase.splunk.com, and you can find the add-ons there, and you can see how many people have downloaded the different apps and the interest level in each one. So there's a lot of good information on that website to help you understand more about each of the add-ons and solutions that we've built together. Let's see here. There were a lot of time fields you mentioned. What do all of them mean? Why are they different?
Sure, sure. Let me actually see if I can pull up an example here. Let's go to this one here. All right, perfect. So if we were to look at source type equals, let's look at the asset metadata as an example. And if we were to take a look at all of these time fields that are in here, right? Things that make sense at a first glance, but then there's a lot of them here. You have things like the last seen, the last authenticated scan date. There is a first seen in here as well. So, well, because this is stateful, what we do is we store all the different times that could pertain to something. Because we have licensed and unlicensed assets, we keep track of when the last authenticated scan occurred on the asset, as well as the last licensed scan. But other things like when we had last observed it, regardless of what source touched it. Was it an agent scan? Was it just a discovery scan? Was it something else, right? Did a third party update their asset metadata? That's all conveyed as part of last seen. Other things that make a little bit more obvious sense, last Nessus scan that was run, first time we observed the asset and the first time that it was ever observed in a scan. All of these different time fields are going to mean very different things depending on what you're looking for. So we don't want to stop you from understanding what's there. We'll just relay all of the relevant time.
Gotcha. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Let's see the next question. You mentioned that all of the fields are being sent in the event. What about the plugin data? Is there any difference between agents or scans?
So no difference between agents and scans. When we take a look at a vulnerability within the data set, it doesn't matter if it's agented or if it's not. Here's an example of an agent asset. All the different metadata that we present is all there. Every field that we are storing, we're relaying back. If we take a look here, for example, in the plugin metadata, this finding, if we want to know what the base scores were, what are the temporal vectors, description, anything that you can think of is here, including things like the external references, what CVEs are there, the IAV, everything is there. So it's worth noting that we're not hiding anything. All the relevant metadata is there. Now, when we think about things like agent versus a traditional scan, we don't discern between the two, aside from just flagging what the source was. It's the same plugin ID in either case. So if it was an agent scan that run once a day, and then another finding came in from a traditional scan after that, the data will be merged together on our back end. So we're just going to pull all that information back. In short, we're not hiding anything. We're giving you all the data that we have.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have another question out there. Are there any landmines we should avoid with app deployment?
In terms of landmines, I would say just make sure you put this on a heavy forwarder if you're not going to put it on the primary instance, which I would not recommend you do. Put it on a heavy forwarder. Make sure there's enough memory and just enough resource headroom to go ahead and run this, because it's going to be talking to either one of our platforms and feeding a lot of data back. You're going to want a few gig of memory. You're going to want some decently fast CPU, because we're adding all of these fields here, right? These are we're constructing these within the forwarder or within the app. So make sure that you've got enough room to be able to basically be reshaping this information that's being fed into Splunk. Aside from that, with enough memory and enough resources to go ahead and run it, it's pretty straightforward from there. Other things that you might want to consider doing is maybe not put it on your primary index, move it to a separate index, and make sure that things are properly handled. But anything, it's no different than any other large volume of metadata.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It looks like that's all the questions we have. Are there any other questions out there, or did hopefully Dennis that answered your question that you had about the landmines? I'm trying to look. Let me just do one more quick look up here. Yeah. So it looks like those are all the questions. I don't know, Steve or Simon, is there anything else that you wanted to cover or talk about? Any gotchas with this integration or things to be on the lookout for if customers are interested in it?
Yeah, actually, I did notice there was one other question from that was discussing what TA are we using these live demos. The TA that's being used here is the Tenable add-on for Splunk and just the app, just the standard things that were released by Tenable. So these two right here. So these would be the ones to install.
Okay, perfect. So that looks like that was in. How would that be ingested and searched into Splunk? Okay, so it looks like you covered that. Perfect. Let me do another quick search of our different mailboxes that we have here. All right, it looks like I think those are all the questions we have today. And again, if you have any further questions, feel free, here's some information, feel free to reach out to Splunk at Tenable.com. And then also you can reach out to me as well, bmoyer@splunk.com, and happy to answer any and all questions you have. And like I said, please take a visit to splunkbase.splunk.com. And it'll have all the different integrations we have and all the information around the integrations. And it gives you stats so you can understand how many people have downloaded it. For instance, the Tenable TA, the add-on that we have, has over 55,000 downloads. So obviously extremely important and popular joint solution that we've worked on together. And then want to make sure that everyone's aware we do have a hackathon coming up. And the hackathon, as you can see, the timeline, kind of the ideation phase is coming up. So April 28th through May 25th is where you come up with the ideas of what you want to work on. But you can find more information at splunk.com /hackathon 2025. And then you go through the development phase, and then obviously choose your track. And then the best part is, this is for Splunk users and people that are understand Splunk, enjoy using Splunk, and have many different ideas of how to use Splunk. And you can also do that or earn prizes while you're doing that. So Cisco store gift cards up to $400, EDU credits up to $1,500 in value, and .conf passes as well. And .conf is extremely important event for us, and that's coming up. And typically we have it in Las Vegas, but this year it's going to be in Boston. So pretty exciting change this year for all of us, but just make sure, take a look at that hackathon, and hopefully you'll be able to join us there. I just wanted to thank Simon and Steve for the great presentation. Really important topic for a lot of our customers, like I said, and we have the joint integration that has 55,000 plus downloads. So pretty important to a lot of people in the industry out there. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the integration or how you get started or how we can help. So thanks again, everyone, for your time, and hopefully it was well worth it, and we'll be in touch soon. So thank you very much.